Hello, I'm Dr. Johnny Lupinacci from Washington State University, and it's an honor to be presenting at the 3rd Annual Eco-Ability Conference. I'd like to take a moment to thank the presenters and the organizers participating in this event. The title of my paper today is called Imaginings of Community, Perceptions of Disability, the Environment, and Inclusion. Recognizing the discursive pervasiveness of neoliberal capitalism and its restrictive conceptions of personhood, this paper takes the position that activist scholarship supportive of inclusion for all requires a serious commitment to rethinking how we both constitute and are constituted by understandings of community. This paper will explore alternatives outside of our current historical conjecture to the extent possible, given the inherent limitations of a language rooted in visions of neoliberalism. The unsustainable limits that accompany neoliberal capitalism should compel activist intellectuals to think of potential futures that support the notion of diverse, inclusive, and sustainable communities. The current atrocities of social exploitation and environmental degradation demand the full commitment to examine the cultural assumptions and limits of many currently dominant disciplining theoretical frameworks. However, bodies bound within larger economic and exclusionary paradigms limit the imagination from moving beyond the confines of discursive boundaries. In this way, our subjectivities are so entangled with the discourses of neoliberal capitalism that many feel compelled to publicly concede to its legitimacy, despite how it contributes to pervasive exploitation. Situated within the educational context of eco-justice education and critical disability teaching and research interests, the work presented in this paper will be directed towards the possibilities that critical education possesses to imagine inclusive communities. More specifically, the paper confronts difficult contestations of who is included and excluded, moving beyond the Cartesian dualisms of such problematic binaries. Confronting contestations of who is included and excluded and dominant definitions of community and imagining communities that are truly inclusive. As a theoretical framework, critical education theory spans decades. However, this paper works in solidarity with the diverse scholarship of critical disability studies that seeks to challenge and interrupt perceptions of hegemonic normalcy and contest ableism by highlighting moments that can provide us opportunities to challenge the dominant ideology at work when conceptualizing community through an imaginative rendering taken from a variety of critical traditions such as intersectional ecofeminism, critical disability studies, critical animal studies, and through the projects of eco-ability and eco-justice. Understandings of community are culturally mediated and thus directly linked to century-old patterns of beliefs and behaviors that rely on the historicity of the privileging of individuals over the recognition of our existence as a complex web of biologically and culturally diverse relationships that make up the living systems to which we all belong. Drawing on scholarship from ecofeminism and eco-justice education, this paper examines methodology for critically and ethically understanding the relationships that connect us to critical projects that push us to imagine truly inclusive communities that contribute to sustaining life for all members. This presentation examines how humans identifying as separate from and superior to one another and everything else became a Western concept constructed within modernist discourses that prioritize the individual over community, culture over nature, and human over animal. This research presents methodologies for professionals allied to the community, defined by Goodley, drawing from Finkelstein, as, and this is a quote, services and professionals that respond to and are led by the aspirations of individuals with disabilities and their represented organizations, end quote. So the paper shares methods for professionals allied to the community working directly to identify how the dominant discourses reproduced in our day-to-day relationships and practices construct understandings of community. Further, as professionals allied to the community, this work seeks to support self-advocacy through educational efforts to eliminate the pervasiveness of hegemonic structures that threaten inclusiveness for both human communities and the more than human world. This paper draws from an eco-justice education framework to share research that involves educators and activists as potential professionals allied to the community, being asked to examine taken for granted cultural assumptions influencing how we understand community as an essential part of educational reform efforts to support truly inclusive, diverse, decentralized, and sustainable communities. This paper is an exploration of the power of imagination and discourse analysis in connection with the practice of taking unplanned excursions through local spaces, focusing on the ways in which utopian visions of diverse communities that are situational, local, and supportive of living systems offer insight into a sustainable future. This work explores how these utopian visions complement the development of a strong critical and ethical analysis of the discourses shaping the subject, and thus how we conceive community. The paper examines how eco-justice practices in teacher education through self-organized pedagogy are applied to untamed experiences had within the local that move participants beyond reality and tap into the imaginative power of unapologetically exploring what can be through deconstructing the discursive formations shaping what is. This paper is based on the a priori assumption that modern industrialized culture is so pervasive in how we think and act that reality simply reinforces the enactment of atrocities through which many people are killing each other on the planet. Yet no matter how buried beneath layers of concrete and concepts, human cultures remain of and with relationships of mutualism that support their existence. Despite how our eyes and institutionally socialized minds tell us to isolate and hierarchize our human nature over remembering and reconnecting our ecological intelligence in tune with being part of complex sets of relationships that are always there, we tend to understand the human potential to ignore this gift in pursuit of false illusions of individual existence. And those false illusions can be overcome by the fact that we have an even greater potential to recognize and celebrate the power of mutual aid and cooperation, or to celebrate our existence as part of a diverse system that doesn't need an authority or a state that enforces dominant perceptions of normalcy to ensure survival and the right to coexist as diverse beings. Imagination and community, the theory of the dérive. Allowing for educational spaces that encourage imagination and embrace the utopian impulse fosters both formal and not so formal opportunities to explore and imagine individually and as a community not just a revolution, but re-evolutions of our everyday life. Radical departures from what is, with resulting creative spaces in which we can explore alternatives that are situational, local, and in support of living systems. In the theory of the dérive, Guy Debord describes the dérive, one of the primary situationist practices. Debord explains that the dérive is a technique of rapid passage through varied ambiances. He further clarifies, quote, "Dérive involve playful, constructive behavior and awareness of psychogeographical effects, and are thus quite different from the classic notions of journey or stroll. In a dérive, one or more persons during a certain period drop their relations, their work, and leisure activities, and all their other usual motives for movement and action, and let themselves be drawn by the attractions of the terrain and the encounters they find there. What the practice of the dérive includes is a reference point, a practice from which one is encouraged to let go and navigate place with the courage to embrace the utopian impulse while recognizing the complex interconnected systems to which we all belong. While the actual practice of the dérive physically involves taking unplanned excursions, which students often like to call wandering, the physical interactions with place, they are also excursions of the mind. In other words, they can be practices of imagining relationships as subjects disciplined by different discourses, imagining relationships that aren't framed in value hierarchies. This excursion encourages us as subjects, and we are all subjects, to explore life disciplined by something other than what is, or the man-stream, white-stream, ableist discourses of human supremacy. When we engage in such pedagogies, there are opportunities to break free from the shackles of what is supposedly our realities and shatter the chains constraining our desires to fulfill a utopian impulse, a drive to love, care for, enjoy, and celebrate our existence, not just for us, but in ways that support the right for all living beings and future generations. When we engage in such actions of solidarity, we imagine together a very different world, and we celebrate where that world exists in each of our everyday lives. The result, re-evolutions, not just one, but the many visions of imagined revolutions. Eco-justice educators and eco-ability educators seek and sometimes carve out spaces and opportunities for us all to collaborate and build solidarity. This occurs through learning from locally horizontally organized pedagogy that inspires us to imagine and challenge current perceptions of how we understand the world. Most importantly, we take excursions or dérives that explore living in ways that are situational, local, and in support of living systems. In such projects in which we extend beyond the limited perceptions of what is normal, or in a neoliberalized normalcy, it is essential to embrace a collective desire to imagine. I draw on this concept of imagining to validate our desire and our collective ability to live together, and to do so in such a way that allows us to equitably share the planet with each other, the more than human world, and future generations. Among all the imagining this encourages, all the planning, the sharing, the teaching, and the learning, the idea is that this will spread through the community, reconnecting us with our solidarity as we move towards collectively envisioned, truly collaborative, decentralized community. Together we give the green light to our human desires to explore our utopian impulse, the drive we have to share and experience a place, and when those places seem so few and far between, the drive for us to create them in our minds, in our art, and our songs, and our stories, and how we communicate, and then to bring them into the realm of bring them from the realm of the imagination into the world, which is never separate from imagination, but that we recognize as real, or how we define what we perceive to be normal. An eco-justice education framework in critical disability studies in education. Eco-justice education is defined by Martišević et al. As, quote, the understanding that the local and global ecosystems are essential to all life, challenging the deep cultural assumptions underlying modern thinking that undermine those systems, and the recognition of the need to restore the cultural and environmental commons, end quote. Central to an eco-justice analysis in connection with deconstructing perceptions of disability is the importance of recognizing the differences between ecologically centered cultures and dominant individual-centered cultures. Such efforts require explicit attention to understanding the eco-social structural relationships between language, culture, and education. Understanding how language influences culture and the ways in which culture influences language is essential to understanding how we conceptualize and implement changes to what could and ought to be truly inclusive communities. Understanding the language-culture relationship opens up space within educational projects for the examination of how Western industrial culture, or the current historical conjecture, the neoliberalized subject or ableist self, has emerged from a specific set of cultural practices and historical events, as well as the need for activist educators to take action to address these deeply rooted cultural assumptions. Martišević et al. Draw from postmodernism and ecofeminism to describe discourses of modernity as, quote, the specific set of discourses that together create our modern, taken-for-granted, value-hierarchized worldview. The critical examination of these discourses, or shared cultural meanings, is complex and allows for the multidimensional analysis of language and culture in connection with taken-for-granted assumptions regarding what is valuable, and then, by default, what becomes worthless, and how these concepts are applied. The analysis of a superior-inferior dualism, for example, culture-nature, male-female, reason-emotion, and mind-body, dualisms allow eco-justice theorists to identify a powerful group of discourses that form metaphors that dominate how we, as subjects in a modern area, interpret difference and construct meaning. Martišević et al. Explain that these discourses of modernity consist of individualism, mechanism, progress, rationalism or scientism, commodification, consumerism, anthropocentrism, androcentrism, and ethnocentrism. Eco-justice theorists emphasize the role these discourses and their associated discursive practices play together in contributing to the socio-cultural conditions through which systems of exploitation gain and maintain power to the extent that such systems become the way it is. While eco-justice theorists have certainly hinted at the importance of interrogating the intersections of these discourses and discursive practices in connection with disability, they fail to do so explicitly. In a similar vein of research, eco-ability and critical disability scholars focus on the interconnected ways in which these discourses of modernity have and continue to impact perceptions of disability. Nocella emphasizing the importance of connecting ableism and speciesism as, quote, social constructions interwoven into society promoting civilization, normalcy, and intellectualism grounded in modernity. Defines eco-ability as, and this is a quote, the theory that nature, non-human animals, and people with disabilities promote collaboration, not competition, interdependency, not independence, and respect for difference and diversity, not sameness and normalcy. So in this paper, I'm drawing from ecofeminism, eco-justice education, and the important scholarship from the eco-ability movement, which closely intersects with critical disability studies and critical animal studies, to focus on how dominant discourses of modernity have created the very socio-cultural conditions for ableist conceptions of community to exist and even thrive. Further, this assertion hinges on the function of discourses to maintain a system of exploitation by taking a closer look at anthropocentrism, or the belief system that situates humans at the center of everything and hierarchically superior to all otherized beings. Critical animal studies scholars interrogate the ideological manifestation of anthropocentrism in relationship to humanist discourses that emerge in relationship to an ontology of being rooted in Western philosophy and science. Eco-ability scholar Sarat Collins explains, while anthropocentrism has led to the grim reality of widespread forest clearing, fish trawling, pollution, and war, combined with the deadly practices of eugenics, this ideology has produced racial segregation, mass murder, and genocide, and has led to deadly experiments on billions of humans and non-human beings. That's an end quote from Sarat Collins. Further, Collins asserts, end quote, while disability scholars have argued that ethics of the body must begin with the unstable category of disability, end quote, she suggests, quote, the category of the animal must also be considered as an inherent part of the equation, end quote. Collins states, quote, those viewed as disabled and those viewed as animal have both been figured as strange and are devalued due to the perceived biological inferiority, end quote. Eco-justice, critical animal studies, and eco-ability scholarship overlap in that they agree that neoliberalized perception of self in relationship to dominant social constructions of normal is a manifestation of anthropocentric discourses and thus can be understood and resisted through a process that I detail out later in this paper. For those of us disciplined by modernist assumptions of human superiority and privileged by dominant definitions of ability, the analysis of the aforementioned discourses allow for the examination of the relationships between our language, how we think, and our behaviors that undermine living systems. These powerful discourses contribute to the ever-growing ecological crisis, a crisis that eco-justice educators identify and understand as a cultural crisis. Without attention to such discourses, sustainability and social justice, two inseparable projects, become recursions of the same problem. The construction and maintaining of communities based on members recognized and valued based on their humanness, normalcy, and their ability to contribute to a human ableist society. Keeping the conversation going and engaging in action. Using variations of these figures and the concepts discussed in this paper to illustrate the differences between these fundamentally different ways of interpreting and understanding the world, this work engages educators, scholars, and activists, really any professionals allied to the community, in a dialogue focused on imagining community conceptualized by these two very different figures in order to explore how community can be constituted in ways that are either exclusionary, unjust, and unsustainable, or inclusive, socially just, and sustainable. More explicitly, when engaging in conceptualizing or imagining community, this work asks participants to consider how an illusion of disembeddedness supports an economic and political system based on anthropocentrism and ableism and contributes to conceptions of community. And furthermore, how an ecological understanding would and does contribute to understanding how we might explore alternatives to the cultural assumption contributing to the centric thinking that allows for so much unjust social suffering and environmental degradation. In conclusion, as professionals allied to the community, this work hopes to begin a necessary conversation for reconceptualizing how it is community is conceptualized together with and in support of self-advocacy through educational efforts to eliminate the pervasiveness of hegemonic structures that perpetuate the constituting of community through anthropocentric and ableist discourses and discursive practices. In summary, this paper draws from an eco-justice education framework and eco-ability projects to spark a dialogue that ignites and sets fire to current dominant discourses disciplining how educators and activists, as potential professionals allied to the community, conceive of community. A fire that rages on to inspire, interrupt, and expose the injustices currently being perpetuated, even by those whose intentions are to conceive of socially just and sustainable communities, but often find themselves excluding diverse perspectives and silenced voices from how we in solidarity might come together to imagine community. It is in this spirit of inclusion, as a concept reclaimed from discourses of exclusion, or as a concept understood beyond the Cartesian dualism in which inclusion is an epiphenomenon of exclusivity, I conclude by focusing the discussion toward the difficult necessity for learning together the importance of recognizing and representing difference as the key to supporting cultural change. I truly believe that if professionals allied to the community and self-advocates together do not rethink the anthropocentric and ableist frameworks constituting Western industrial dominant conceptions of community, then we are destined to recreate the very predicament that we set out to change. Inspired by the critical disability and critical animal studies movements to liberate all human and more than human beings, I would like to employ the guiding principles of solidarity and action toward the following practical steps towards extending this discussion and fostering cultural change and activist scholarship aimed towards supporting a paradigm shift from a rational, mechanized, and human-centered thinking to discourses that are local, situational, and in support of living systems. Recognizing that there is no one set way to engage in this work or predict the directions of these critical dialogues, I conclude by outlining a few potential suggestions. Since a huge part of this discussion is based on recognizing that the discussion itself has to include diverse perspectives in consideration of each other and the more than human communities, the principal action in the following steps is basically building networks of solidarity which translate to recognize, respecting, and representing diversity among a multitude of movements to educate, organize, and take action together in diverse ways to break from anthropocentric and ableist visions of community. So step one is to engage in radical teaching and learning. The kind of teaching and learning that explores as professionals allied to the community and collaboratively with self-advocates, rethinking the assumptions influencing how we as humans construct meaning and thus how we learn to relate to each other in the more than human world. Further, makes the commitment to critically and ethically examining how we understand educating, organizing, and taking action towards supporting collectively imagining together healthy communities that include all beings and the intrinsic value of recognizing, respecting, and representing the right of all to exist as beings that belong to the same shared ecological system. So teaching and learning. The other thing is to engage in critical and ethical examinations of just imagining communities. So let's come together and imagine community. But as notions of community are all too often defined in terms of human-centered exclusion and based on perceptions of normalcy, it's important to work to reclaim community and to imagine it in terms of who and what is included in our definitions of this construct. And more importantly, how those definitions contribute to either supporting or undermining the right of all beings to coexist in such imaginations. So, imagining community. The other step is to engage in examining community in terms of inclusions and the diverse ways in which our living relationships can be recognized, respected, and represented through teaching and learning among all members. Specifically engaging in recognizing the role that activist networks, especially self-advocacy networks, play in alleviating and eliminating unjust suffering in our communities. We have to build networks of solidarities with all these organizations. And engage in strong alliance with all those suffering and support the oppressed in solidarity while simultaneously working to shift and challenge the dominant systems that often governs the alleviation of suffering of all marginalized and subjugated beings. In all cases, we have to show our solidarity and take action to stop the systemic domination of one another, ourselves, and our more than human kin. So imagine individually and share collectively these imaginings of communities with others in spaces where those visions are not silenced, nor privilege afforded to only anthropocentric and dominant perceptions of ability. Challenge those dominant perceptions of what is normal, and imagine what could be possible. Resist all authorities of normalcy governing bodies, mind, and emotions, and reject the illusion that as human animals we are separate from and superior to each other and all living things on the planet. Learn together to listen to one another and to accept that voice doesn't all sound the same or even sometimes sound at all. That words are not the only form of communication and worth not defined by degrees of wealth or one's ability to appear as independent. In fact, independency being part of the problem here. The point is that we need to engage in relationships committed to diversity and recognizing and celebrating dependency. Communities ought to be understood as the ecological systems to which we all belong. When we learn what it is and what it means to belong without framing that understanding as human-centered and ableist, we learn to join the fight to overcome the isolating ills and exclusionary violences of Western industrial culture. Thank you.